Maya had always lived by a simple, cold philosophy. Keep your head down, serve the coffee, and turn a blind eye to the violence unfolding in the alleys. Her survival depended on her invisibility. However, that changed the moment she decided to help an old woman the previous night. Now, as four men in sharp, tailored suits strode into the diner and bolted the doors behind them, she realized her break from the rules had come with a steep price. The neon sign outside Lou's diner hadn't buzzed a full word since 2019. It just blinked DNR, casting a sickly red glow over the wet asphalt. Maya taped the sole of her left boot for the third time this week, pulling the duct tape tight with her teeth. It was 2:14 a.m. The air inside smelled of stale grease, burnt filter coffee, and the harsh ammonia she used to mop the linoleum. She was clear's throat, tired. Not the kind of tired a good night's sleep could fix, but a deep, marrow-level exhaustion that came from working 2 minimum-wage jobs just to keep a landlord from tossing her mattress onto the street. Trash needs taking out, Maya. Lou grunted from behind the grill. He didn't look up from scraping blackened grease off the flat top. She grabbed the 2 heavy black bags. They leaked something foul, staining the hem of her apron. Maya pushed through the heavy metal back door into the alley. The cold October wind hit her like a wet towel, biting through her thin flannel shirt. That was when she heard it. It wasn't a scream. Clear's throat. Screams are loud, theatrical. This was a wet, ragged gasp, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting a dumpster. Maya froze. The smart thing to do, the city thing to do, was to drop the bags, walk back inside, and lock the deadbolt. You don't look into the shadows. You don't ask questions. But she heard a second sound. The unmistakable scrape of a switchblade opening. Just the ring, Grandma. Take it off. The voice was young, strung out, and jittery. She peered around the rusted edge of the commercial dumpster. A kid, no older than 20, had a woman pinned against the brick wall. He was shaking, the knife trembling in his hand. The woman was entirely out of place. Even in the dim light of the alley, Maya could tell her heavy wool coat was cashmere. Her silver hair was pinned up, though a few strands had fallen across a face that was strikingly calm despite the bleeding cut on her cheek. She wasn't pleading. She was staring at the kid with a look of cold, maternal disappointment. You don't want to do this, she said. Her voice was raspy, cultured, and perfectly steady. Shut up. Give me the ring. He pressed the blade closer to her throat. She was clutching her chest, her breathing turning shallow. She wasn't just cornered, she was having some sort of attack. Maya looked at the trash bags in her hands. She looked at the heavy, industrial-sized can of chemical degreaser sitting on the loading dock next to her. Don't do it, Maya, her brain screamed. Her hand grabbed the degreaser. She stepped out from behind the dumpster. Hey, she said. The kid whipped around. Back off, waitress. This ain't your business. You're right. It's not, she said, keeping her voice dead flat. But you're standing on Lou's property. And Lou keeps a loaded shotgun under the register. He's also got a temper and a drinking problem. I just pushed the panic button by the door. It was a lie. There was no button. Lou didn't own a gun. He owned a baseball bat that was mostly used to kill rats. The kid hesitated. Maya raised the aerosol can, aiming the nozzle right at his eyes. This is industrial lye and bleach. You want to see what it does to your corneas before the cops get here? The kid looked from her to the can to the old woman who was now leaning heavily against the bricks, gasping for air. He spat on the ground, folded the knife, and bolted down the alley, disappearing into the fog. Maya exhaled, her knees suddenly shaking. She put the can down and walked over to the woman. Up close, she looked fragile, her skin pale and clammy. Are you okay? Do you need an ambulance? Maya asked, reaching out to steady her. She flinched slightly at Maya's touch, then settled. No hospitals. Just my medication in my pocket. Maya reached into the silk-lined pocket of her coat, Clear's throat, and pulled out a small inhaler. She handed it to her. She took 2 deep puffs, closed her eyes, and leaned her head back against the grimy brick. Slowly, the color started to return to her face. Come inside, Maya said, looking nervously at the mouth of the alley. It's freezing. I'll get you a glass of water. She opened her eyes. They were dark, sharp, and assessing. She looked at Maya's worn boots, her stained apron, and the burn scar on her right wrist from a deep fryer accident 2 ago. You took a foolish risk, girl, she said, her voice regaining its strength. Yeah, well, I'm off the clock in 10 minutes. My quota for caring is depleted. Let's get you inside before he comes back with friends. Maya guided her through the back door and sat her in a vinyl booth near the kitchen. Lou gave her a side eye but didn't say a word when Maya poured her a cup of hot water and handed her a stack of cheap paper napkins to dab the blood on her cheek. She sat in the booth looking entirely alien in her surroundings. She wiped the blood from her face with a strange, quiet dignity. "Do you have someone I can call?" Maya asked, leaning against the counter. "A cab? A family member. My driver was supposed to be waiting at the corner of 5th and Main. We encountered an unexpected detour. I walked to avoid it," she said, cryptically. "I will handle my own transport." She pulled a sleek, matte black phone from her pocket and dialed a single digit. She spoke in rapid, quiet Italian. Maya only caught the tone. It was a command. 10 minutes later, headlights flashed through the diner windows. A black town car idled at the curb. The woman stood up. She smoothed the front of her coat, ignoring the smudge of alley dirt on the expensive fabric. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a wad of bills, hundreds, thick enough to choke a horse. She placed it on the table. "No," Maya said instantly. She paused, looking at her. "Take it." "You intervened." "I didn't intervene for a tip," Maya said, crossing her arms. "I make $10 an hour. If I take that, Lou will think I stole it from a register, or the cops will think I'm dealing in the bathroom. Put it away. Just go home." Her eyes narrowed slightly. It wasn't anger. It was curiosity. She studied Maya's face for a long, uncomfortable, clear-as-throat moment. "What is your name?" she asked. "Maya." "Thank you, Maya, for the hot water and the lie." A faint, dry smile touched her lips. She walked out the door. The bell jingled. The black car pulled away, swallowed by the rain. Maya took a dirty rag, wiped the table where she sat, and finished her shift. She went home, fell into bed, and forgot about her. The morning shift at Lou's is a different kind of hell. It's construction workers, hungover college kids, and people wanting their eggs over easy yesterday. It was 9:30 a.m., clear as throat. Maya had slept exactly 4 hours. Her feet were throbbing, and she was balancing 3 plates of greasy hash browns on her left arm, while pouring coffee with her right. Then, the diner went dead silent. It didn't happen all at once. The chatter of the construction workers died first, then the clatter of silverware. She turned around, the coffee pot still in her hand. 4 men had just walked in. They didn't belong in Lou's. They didn't belong in this zip code. They wore suits that cost more than this entire building. Charcoal gray, midnight blue, tailored to fit shoulders that were impossibly broad. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized stillness. One of them, a giant of a man with a broken nose and eyes like dead coal, walked past the "Please wait to be seated" sign. He walked straight to the front door, flipped the open sign to closed, and turned the deadbolt with a loud click. Panic spiked in her chest. Besides her, Lou dropped a spatula. Another man, leaner but with a scar running through his left eyebrow, stepped to the center of the diner. He didn't raise his voice, but it carried perfectly. "Everyone finishes their breakfast. Everyone stays seated." The construction workers, guys who usually loved a bar fight, shrank into their booths. These weren't thugs. These were professionals. You could smell the violence on them, clean and cold. The man with the scar walked up to the counter. He looked at Lou, who was sweating grease and terror. "Who worked the late shift last night?" the man asked. His voice was polite. It made it worse. Lou swallowed. Hard. He looked at Maya. He didn't mean to betray her, but his eyes darted to her face for half a second. It was enough. The man shifted his gaze to her. His eyes dropped from her face down to her hands. He stared at the jagged burn scar on her right wrist. "Maya," he said. It wasn't a question. Her grip tightened on the handle of the coffee pot. If she threw the boiling liquid in his face, she might make it out the back door, but the giant by the front door was already moving, flanking her. "What do you want?" Maya asked. Her voice shook. She hated that it shook. "You're coming with us," the man said. "Like hell I am." She stepped back, bumping into the pie display case. "I don't know who you are. I don't owe anyone money. You are not in trouble, Maya," the man said, stepping closer. He didn't reach for her. He just invaded her space, letting his physical presence do the work. "But you are coming with us. You can walk out the front door quietly, or we can make a scene that will cost your boss his establishment." He reached into his breast pocket. Lou whimpered, putting his hands up, but the man didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a thick stack of banded bills and dropped it onto the counter next to a half-eaten plate of pancakes. "For the interruption to your business," he told Lou. He looked back at Maya. "Your coat." Maya looked at the four men. She looked at the locked door. There was no way out of this that didn't end with her in an ambulance or worse. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She untied her apron with trembling fingers, threw it on the counter, and grabbed her denim jacket from the hook in the back. She walked out from behind the counter. The giant opened the door for her. Outside, 3 black SUVs were parked illegally, blocking the street. No one was honking. "Get in," the scarred man said, opening the back door of the middle vehicle. She climbed inside. The seats were soft, smelling of rich leather and expensive cologne. The door slammed shut behind her, plunging her into tinted, soundproof isolation. The scarred man got in the front passenger seat. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded as the car surged forward. The man didn't look back. "To the man you owe a conversation to." "I don't owe anyone anything." "You helped a woman last night," he said quietly. Her stomach dropped. The alley, the cashmere coat, the calm, commanding voice. "The old lady," she whispered. "That old lady," the man said, his tone sharpening into something dangerous, "is Beatrice Rossi. And you are going to see her son." She leaned back against the headrest, closing her eyes. Rossi. Even a waitress scraping plates in the slums knew that name. They owned the shipping yards. They owned the unions. They owned the politicians. She hadn't saved a stray grandmother. She had saved the matriarch of the biggest crime syndicate on the eastern seaboard. And now she was in their car. They drove for 40 minutes, leaving the rotting infrastructure of the city behind, climbing up into the hills where the estates sat hidden behind Clear's throat, iron gates, and old money. The car passed through a heavy security gate that opened automatically. They rolled up a long, curving driveway lined with ancient oak trees. The house wasn't a tacky mansion. It was a sprawling, brutalist structure of stone, glass, Clear's throat, and dark wood. It looked like a fortress pretending to be a home. The car stopped. The door opened. The giant gestured for her to get out. She stepped onto the gravel, wrapping her cheap denim jacket tightly across her chest. She felt painfully small. Maya was escorted through massive double doors into a foyer that echoed with their footsteps. There was no loud music, no gaudy gold statues, just sparse, expensive art and a suffocating silence. The scarred man led her down a long hallway, stopping in front of heavy oak doors. He knocked once, opened it, and gestured for her to step inside. She walked in. The door clicked shut behind her. The office was vast, lined with books and smelling of cedar and old paper. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat a man. He didn't look up immediately. He was reviewing a leather-bound ledger, a heavy gold pen moving in quick, sharp strokes. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and faint ink. "Sit," he said. His voice was deep, devoid of any warmth. She stood exactly where she was. "I'd rather stand." He stopped writing. Slowly, he raised his head. He had her eyes. Beatrice's eyes. Dark, sharp, and assessing. But where hers had carried a weary dignity, his were predatory. His jaw was clenched, covered in a shadow of stubble. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, who existed entirely on black coffee and high-stress adrenaline. This was Dominic Rossi. He set the pen down. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. He studied her. He looked at her taped boots, her faded jeans, the exhaustion bruised into the skin under her eyes. "Maya," he said. It sounded different coming from him. He tested the name, weighing it. "Look," she said, her voice tight. "If this is about last night, I didn't know who she was. I just saw a woman getting mugged. I didn't do it to get involved in whatever this is. I don't want a reward. I don't want anything. Let me go back to my job." Dominic didn't blink. "My mother is a cautious woman. She travels with a detail. Last night, her driver was intercepted. A hit was ordered. She walked 3 blocks to avoid the crossfire and sought shelter in an alley to catch her breath. That is when a local junkie with a knife found her." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You intervened. You threatened him with a chemical burn. You brought her inside. And then, you refused a $10,000 cash tip." He said the amount slowly. 10 grand. It was more than she made in a year. Her stomach gave a sick lurch. "I thought it was dirty money," she said defensively. "I didn't want Lou's getting raided." "Nobody refuses money," Dominic said flatly. The cynicism in his voice was so heavy, It practically dragged on the floor. Everyone has a price. Everyone is running a hustle. So, tell me, Maya, what's yours? I don't have a hustle, she snapped, the anger finally burning through the fear. I was tired. I was carrying out rotting garbage. I saw an old lady dying in an alley, and I reacted. That's it. Not everything is a scheme, Mr. Rossi. His eyes narrowed. The air in the room grew heavier, thick with tension. He stood up. He was taller than she expected, moving with a lethal grace as he walked around the desk. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. She forced herself not to step back. She tilted her chin up, glaring at him. You saved my mother's life, he said quietly. If she hadn't gotten her medication, her heart would have given out. I owe you a debt. You don't owe me anything. We are even. Erase the ledger. A Rossi does not erase a ledger. He stepped closer, his voice dropping an octave. You don't understand the world you just stepped into. By touching her, by saving her, you put yourself on the board. The people who ordered the hit on her transport last night, they will scour the city to find out what went wrong. They will find the alley. They will find the diner. They will find you. The blood drained from her face. Dominic watched the realization hit her. His expression softened just a fraction. Not into kindness, but into a grim reality. You think you can just walk back into the slums and pour coffee? He asked. You're marked. They will take you, break your fingers, and ask you exactly what my mother said and where she went. Maya felt her knees go weak. She reached out, grabbing the edge of a leather armchair to steady herself. I didn't do anything wrong, she whispered. Morality doesn't keep you breathing, Dominic said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy, black phone identical to the one his mother had used. He held it out to her. What is that? She asked. Your lifeline. You work for me now. She stared at him. I pour coffee. Not anymore, Dominic stated, leaving absolutely no room for debate. You live here, on the estate. You will be assigned a security detail. You will be given a salary. In exchange, you will stay out of sight and do exactly as you are told until I dismantle the family that tried to touch my mother. You're kidnapping me, she said, her voice rising in panic. I am keeping you alive. He corrected coldly. Take the phone. Maya looked at the phone in his outstretched hand. She looked at the dark, unyielding expression on his face. He wasn't giving her a choice. He was giving her an order wrapped in a threat disguised. As protection, she reached out and took the phone. His fingers brushed hers. They were warm, a sharp contrast to the ice in his eyes. Good, Dominic said, stepping back. Rocco will show you to your room. Do not try to leave the grounds. If you run, I cannot protect you. He turned his back on her, walking back to his desk. He picked up his pen. The conversation was over. She was dismissed. But as she walked toward the heavy oak doors, clutching the burner phone like it was a grenade with the pin pulled, she realized the terrifying truth. She hadn't just saved Beatrice Rossi. She had sold her life to her son. Her room was the size of Lou's entire diner. It smelled of lavender and expensive wood polish. The bed was massive, swallowed by heavy silk comforters, and the closet was already stocked with clothes in her size. Denim, cashmere, clear's throat, soft cotton. None of it had a price tag. None of it felt like hers. For 3 days, she didn't leave that room. She paced. She stared out the reinforced glass windows at the manicured lawns. A man named Rocco, the giant who had flipped the sign at the diner, stood at the end of her hallway. He didn't speak. He just existed, a mountain of muscle wrapped in a tailored suit, making sure the bird didn't leave the cage. On the 4th night, the silence broke her. It was 3 a.m., Clear's throat. Her body clock was hardwired for the graveyard shift. She swung her legs out of bed, ignoring the plush slippers on the rug, and walked barefoot to the heavy oak door. She turned the handle. It wasn't locked. She stepped into the hallway. Rocco was there, leaning against the wall drinking espresso from a tiny porcelain cup. He looked at her. I want to go to the kitchen, she said. Her voice was raspy from disuse. Rocco set the cup down on a side table. He didn't argue. He just nodded and led the way down the sweeping staircase, through the cavernous dining room, and into a kitchen that looked like a Michelin star prep station. Stainless steel, slate floors, massive industrial refrigerators. Do you want the chef woken? Rocco asked, his voice a low rumble. No, she said quickly. Just leave me alone. Please stand outside. He hesitated, then stepped out into the corridor, leaving the swinging door open a crack. She breathed in. The smell of cold metal and sanitizer grounded her. It wasn't grease and bleach, but it was familiar enough. She opened cabinets until she found a heavy bag of coffee beans, a grinder, and a standard drip machine hidden behind the fancy espresso makers. She needed to do something with her hands. She measured the beans. She poured the water. The rhythmic, mechanical process settled the frantic buzzing in her skull. The machine hissed and sputtered. She leaned against the cold marble counter, wrapping her arms around herself, and watched the dark liquid drip into the glass pot. "You're making a mess of the grind ratio." She jumped, spinning around. Dominic was standing in the doorway opposite Rocco's post. He wore a dark gray Henley, the sleeves pushed up, and dark slacks. Without the suit jacket, he didn't look like a mob boss. He just looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. The dark circles under his eyes were bruised purple, and his jaw was shadowed with heavy stubble. "I like it strong," she said defensively. "It cuts through the cheap beans I usually buy." He walked into the kitchen. Up close, the sheer exhaustion radiating off him was palpable. He didn't look dangerous right now. He looked hollowed out. He opened a cabinet, pulled out 2 ceramic mugs, and set them on the counter next to her. "Pour." She didn't argue. She poured the black coffee into both mugs. She slid one toward him. He picked it up, taking a sip without blowing on it. He didn't flinch at the heat. "They burned Lou's down," he said. The words hit her in the chest like a physical blow. The air rushed out of her lungs. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. "What?" "Last night," Dominic said, staring down into his black coffee. "Gasoline and a match. The fire department put it out before it took the whole block, but the interior is gutted. It's ash." Her vision blurred. Lou's was a roach-infested grease pit, but it was her grease pit. It was the only place in the city that kept a roof over her head. She thought of Lou, sweating over the grill, tossing her a free grilled cheese when she couldn't afford groceries. "Lou," she choked out, panic rising in her throat. He's fine," Dominic cut in, his voice firm, grounding her. "I had my men pull him out of his apartment 2 hours before the fire. He's safe." She stared at him, the tears pooling in her eyes, refusing to fall. "Where is he?" "In New Jersey. Under a different name." Clears throat. "I bought him a new diner, a better one. Fully staffed, up to code. He doesn't have to work the grill anymore unless he wants to." Dominic took another sip of his coffee. He didn't look at her, keeping his gaze fixed on the stainless steel sink. "I pay my debts, Maya. My mother's presence brought violence to his doorstep. I made him whole. You ruined his life," she whispered, the anger bubbling up through the shock. "I extended his life," Dominic corrected coldly. He finally turned his head to look at her. The predatory edge was back in his eyes. "You think the people hunting my family care about collateral damage? They would have tied him to a chair and peeled his skin off to find out what you looked like. I bought him a diner. I bought him breathing room." Clears throat. "And what did you buy me?" she asked bitterly. "A silk cage? Survival." He set the mug down hard. The ceramic clinked loudly against the marble. He stepped closer to her, closing the distance between them until she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You think I want you here?" he asked, his voice a low, rough scrape. "You are a liability. You are a civilian who doesn't know how to keep her mouth shut or her head down. I have 30 men scouring the city trying to dismantle the Lupataxi crew before they make another move on my mother. The last thing I need is a waitress sleeping in my guest wing. Then let me go?" "I can't," he snapped, the control finally slipping. He slammed his hand flat against the counter, trapping her against the edge. "Because if I let you walk out that gate, you will be dead before the sun goes down. And Beatrice Rossi does not allow the people who bleed for her to die in the gutter. You are my responsibility now, whether either of us likes it or not." They stared at each other, breathing hard. The kitchen was dead silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerators. He was so close she could smell the gunpowder and scotch clinging to his clothes. Slowly the anger drained out of his face, leaving only that bone-deep exhaustion. He pushed off the counter, stepping back and running a hand over his face. "Learn to live with the silk cage, Maya," he said quietly. "It's the only world you have left." He turned and walked out the back door, leaving his coffee half finished on the counter. 2 days later, the war came to the front door. Maya was in the library. Beatrice had summoned her. She sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a thick wool shawl, sipping tea. She looked older than she had in the alley. The cold, damp weather was sinking into her joints. "Dominic is angry with you," she said, not looking up from the leather-bound book in her lap. Dominic is angry with the world. She replied, sitting in the armchair opposite her. She wasn't intimidated by her anymore. She was too tired for fear. A faint smile touched her lips. He has had to be. When his father died, the wolves circled. Dominic had to become a monster to keep them at bay. He resents your presence because you remind him of a world where people help each other without a ledger. She closed her book and looked at Maya. You are a complication, Maya, but you are a necessary one. You remind him. She never finished the sentence. The front windows of the library exploded inward. It wasn't a crash. It was a deafening concussive boom that rattled the teeth in her skull. Glass rained down like diamond shrapnel. Before the shards even hit the Persian rug, the deafening chatter of automatic gunfire tore through the air. Get down, she screamed, lunging across the coffee table. She grabbed Beatrice by the shoulders and dragged her to the floor, pulling her behind the heavy reinforced oak desk in the corner. The library doors kicked open. Rocco burst in, a massive assault rifle in his hands. He didn't even look at them. He just laid down a wall of suppressive fire toward the shattered windows. Stay down, Rocco roared over. The noise. They breached the east gate. The house alarms were shrieking, a high-pitched wail that disoriented her. Beatrice was clutching her chest, her breathing shallow and fast. Her inhaler. She patted down her cardigan. Nothing. Rocco, she needs her medicine, she yelled. It's in the foyer, on the console. Rocco shouted back, swapping a magazine with terrifying speed. Don't move. He ducked out of the room to cover the hallway. Maya looked at Beatrice. Her lips were turning blue. She was going into cardiac distress. Waiting wasn't an option. She crawled on her stomach, ignoring the bite of broken glass digging into her palms and knees. She scrambled out of the library and into the massive hallway. It was a war zone. The smell of sulfur and pulverized plaster choked the air. 2 of Dominic's guards were dead on the marble floor. Gunfire echoed from the front foyer. She stayed low, using the decorative marble pillars for cover. She could see the foyer console table 50 feet away. A small black purse sat on top of it. She made a break for it. She sprinted across the open space, grabbed the purse, and dropped hard to the floor behind the heavy oak staircase, just as a line of bullets chewed through the plaster where her head had been a second before. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled the inhaler from the purse. She had it. Drop it. The voice came from right above her. She froze. She slowly looked up. A man in tactical gear stood on the 3rd step of the stairs, a suppressed pistol aimed dead at her face. He wasn't one of theirs. He was wearing a dark balaclava. He didn't want the inhaler. He wanted her. He recognized her from the diner. Stand up slowly, he ordered. She tightened her grip on the small plastic inhaler. She didn't have a weapon. Clear's throat. She didn't have Luzbat or a can of degreaser. All she had was adrenaline and spite. She planted her feet to stand. As she rose, she didn't put her hands up. She lunged forward, driving her shoulder directly into his kneecap. He grunted, his leg buckling, but he didn't fall. He brought the butt of the pistol down hard against her shoulder blade. Pain flared down her spine, dropping her to her knees. He grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back to put a bullet in her brain. A gunshot rang out. It didn't come from the tactical guy. The man holding her hair went rigid. A dark hole blossomed in the center of his forehead. His grip loosened, and he collapsed backward down the stairs, dead before he hit the marble. She fell forward, gasping for air. Dominic stood at the top of the stairs. He was bleeding from a graze on his cheek, his white shirt stained with red. He held a smoking 9mm pistol in his right hand. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wild and completely devoid of humanity. He looked like the monster his mother said he was. He bounded down the stairs, stepping over the dead body, and grabbed her by the arms, hauling her to her feet. Are you hit? He demanded, his hands gripping her tight enough to bruise. Maya, look at me. Are you hit? No, she gasped, holding up the inhaler. Your mother. She can't breathe. The wildness in his eyes snapped back to focus. He took the inhaler, grabbed her hand, and dragged her back toward the library. The gunfire had stopped. Rocco and the surviving guards were securing the perimeter. Dominic slid behind the desk. Beatrice was gray, barely conscious. Dominic shoved the inhaler into her mouth and pressed the canister twice. They knelt there on the ruined carpet, waiting. Slow, agonizing seconds passed. Finally, Beatrice took a ragged, deep breath. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked at Dominic, then at Maya. She reached out with a trembling hand and gripped her wrist, the one with the burn scar. Ledger cleared. She whispered. Dominic slumped back against the mahogany desk, dropping his gun. He looked around the destroyed library, the shattered glass, the blood on the floor. Then, he looked at Maya. Her hands were bleeding, her jeans were torn. She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. But she hadn't run. She hadn't hid in her room. Dominic reached out. He didn't say a word. He just took his blood-stained thumb and gently wiped a streak of dirt and plaster from her cheek. It was a terrifyingly tender gesture from a man whose hands were built for violence. You're not a waitress anymore, Maya, he said quietly, his voice carrying over the wail of the sirens approaching in the distance. She looked at the blood on his shirt. She looked at the gun on the floor. She thought of Lou's diner reduced to ash. He was right. The girl who poured coffee and taped her boots was dead. She was standing in the ashes of her own life. But looking at Dominic's dark, assessing eyes, she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was adapting. And in this city, that was the only way to win. If you made it this far, you know survival isn't pretty. Maya's old life burned to ashes, but a new, darker fire just started. If you love this gritty dive into loyalty, blood, and the cost of doing the right thing, smash that like button. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next thrilling story, and drop a comment below. Would you have saved Beatrice in the alley or walked away? Share this with a friend who loves mob dramas.